Samus Aran? Probably an interesting character to many in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but it's been quite some time since fans of the Metroid series have had a totally new game to look forward to starring Samus Aran herself. Thankfully, players should be carefully watching out for more news on Metroid Prime 4, itself announced to be delayed some time ago after its initial reveal back in 2017. With Retro Studios confirmed to be returning to the helm for the fourth Metroid Prime game, this is a title that all fans have reason to be anticipating. Ahead of that though, let's take a look at the Metroid franchise in this video. The Metroid series primarily follows the female bounty hunter Samus as she fights against either the parasitic aliens known as Metroid or a variety of other monstrosities across different worlds in space. The antagonists can be referred to collectively as the Space Pirates, responsible for killing Samus's parents when she was a toddler and seeking to use the Metroid for their own gain. Genre-wise, the Metroid franchise is host to a variety of action games, save for one, Metroid Prime Pinball for the Nintendo DS. The earliest Metroid titles were platform-based action games, whereas the Metroid Prime sub-series of games, along with Other M, are all 3D action games. The first type of Metroid game helped to create the name Metroidvania, a term associated with players navigating a large map in 2D space, with more areas of the map unlocked as players progress through the game. We'll start off our overview of the Metroid franchise with the first game, releasing in the late 80s for Japan, North America, and Europe. It established a great deal of foundational lore for the series. The parasitic Metroid are being sought out by space pirates so that they can be controlled and used as weapons for personal use. Notable for its time is the fact that Metroid, and the Metroid franchise in general, was one of the earliest to feature a female lead protagonist, along with featuring multiple endings based on the speed with which the game is completed. The game takes place on the planet Zebes, and Samus starts out with a limited arsenal and ability set, later acquiring new abilities and weapons including the Ice and Wave Beam, the Morph Ball, and missiles. Some notable antagonists, including Ridley, whom you may know from the Smash series, Kraid, and the final boss, Mother Brain, are also introduced in this game. Metroid was made following a host of other Smash titles, including the first Mario Bros. Game and the first Legend of Zelda. It set itself apart for its non-linear progression, a characteristic certainly distinct amongst other platformers such as Super Mario Bros. Amidst a sea of legendary titles for the console, Metroid still manages to stand out because it has such a distinct identity. The map system and collection of weapons and items emphasizes exploration, while the tone of the game is very tense. Such key traits are what are often expected in all Metroid games from fans, and considering the fun experience created in the first game, it's kinda understandable. So next up we have Metroid 2, Return of Samus, which released for the Game Boy late in '91 and in '92 across North America, Japan, and Europe. The Galactic Federation Police enlist the help of Samus Aran in their mission to exterminate the Metroid from their home planet, after their own teams have been wiped out when tasked with that same mission. In this game, players eliminate a set amount of Metroid creatures per area, and once that happens, players can proceed further into the game. Metroid are fought at different levels in their life cycle. The more developed they are in their life cycle, the stronger that they'll be. Notable about this game is the graphical standard it set among the other Game Boy titles, with the graphics being comparable to the output on Nintendo titles. It's often seen as the weaker of the games compared to other Metroid titles. Nevertheless, Metroid 2 is still generally regarded well among fans and critics. Years later, in 1994, the world was treated to Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. It's another 2D platformer, as with the previous games, but amongst fans, the Metroid franchise in general, and within gaming history, Super Metroid is a standout. Besides just being a stellar game in and of itself, Super Metroid introduced some essential quality of life improvements, including an auto map and an inventory screen. The story follows the events of Metroid 2, the ending of which saw Samus deliver a Metroid hatchling that she was unable to bring herself to kill to her research facility as she departs for planet SR388. A revived Ridley steals the Metroid and takes it with him to Zebes, where the space pirates, with new and old faces in tow, including Mother Brain, are reorganized and plotting again to amass power through controlling and cloning Metroids. The game was a smash hit critically, and is revered among fans and speedrunners, but didn't sell particularly well. While previous titles were million sellers, they never shifted immense amounts of copies compared to more popular names. It was a little late in Super Nintendo's lifetime, and it released at the same time as the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation in Japan. Nevertheless, the game was still seen as an essential gaming experience for the Super Nintendo, and it was seminal and groundbreaking for its time. Following this, and the defeat of the Space Pirates once again, the Metroid franchise would enter a deep hibernation for several years. It would be briefly interrupted by Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64 in 1999 and its sequel Super Smash Bros. Melee for the Nintendo GameCube's release in 2001, but not truly overturned until the following year. And what a year 2002 would be for Metroid. It would see the release of both Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime. Metroid Fusion is a Game Boy Advance title and is built in a way that's similar to all Metroid games prior, a 2D platformer wherein players explore a huge world. Samus Aran battles against the X-Parasites at the BSL space station in this game, which also includes new Metroid platforming features including ledge grabbing and ladder climbing. It's generally seen as the shorter of the earlier titles, but nonetheless reviews very well, seen as an evolution from what was built upon by its predecessors. Also releasing that year was Metroid Prime for the Nintendo GameCube, a hugely important title for the franchise. It saw a major genre jump. While Metroid Prime retains the emphasis on exploration, tension, power-up collection, and backtracking, this all now takes place in a 3D environment. The game was a shooter played from the first-person vantage point, with the exception of morph ball usage. If you thought the previous Metroid games were tense, then Metroid Prime went for something entirely new, by having enemies staring you right in the face. First-person vantage points can greatly enhance the played character's experience for you as a player, and exploring the unfamiliar world of Talon 4, on edge for hostiles around the corner or taking a moment to admire the greatness of the world around you, Metroid Prime was able to properly convey a great sense of scale, a powerful sense of not just tension, but also adventure as well. While Prime is an entirely new experience, it still makes use of some familiar features, including the need to find weapons or abilities, like the Ice Beam and the Morph Ball. In all regions of release, the game was a strong seller, and Metroid Prime was met with widespread acclaim, with particular praise for such traits as the game's encouragement of exploration and sense of atmosphere. 2002 continued to be a strong year for the Metroid franchise nonetheless, and it marked the beginning of a wonderful period for the franchise. In the year 2004, Metroid fans and the gaming public were treated to another similar year, featuring the release of both Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Metroid Zero Mission is a Game Boy Advance title that is a remake of the first Metroid game. However, it's not just a direct copy. The game adds new items and areas and new mini-bosses. This remake, in retelling the plot of the first game, also places an emphasis on Samus's backstory and uses cutscenes to do so. While initially it was suggested amongst Nintendo staff to port Super Metroid to the Game Boy Advance, with the console also hosting remakes of other SNES classics including Super Mario World, it was later decided that the original Metroid would be reworked instead, in a bid to show gamers what the origin of the franchise was. While praised across many gaming outlets as a great gaming experience and an essential title for GBA owners, the game's perceived short length was frequently lamented. Aside from Zero Mission, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes released for the GameCube later in 2004. The Metroid Prime games were originally envisioned as a trilogy of games, set between the first and second Metroid titles. Retro Studios, which worked on the first title, would return for this game and for the third Prime game. While Retro Studios' reputation was established with the Prime games themselves, Nintendo fans also know them for their work on more recent Donkey Kong Country titles. As for Echoes, it sees Samus traveling to the planet Aether to investigate the disappearance of Galactic Federation police marines. Unique about the world of Aether is that the planet exists in two dimensions, the standard light Aether and the alternate dark Aether. While Samus can traverse through light Aether normally, dark Aether's environment is naturally dangerous to Samus, and she takes damage while there. Later she finds the dark suit and the light suit, the former of which can drastically reduce the rate of incurred damage due to dark Aether air, and the latter of which making her invulnerable to the toxic effects of dark Aether air. Echoes also introduces split-screen multiplayer gameplay, with players being able to choose between a standard deathmatch mode and a coin-collecting bounty mode. Keeping with the theme of light and dark, Echoes also introduces the character of Dark Samus, who's regularly seen throughout the story. The story was in fact much more of a focus in this game than it was for Metroid Prime, with Echoes making more use of cutscenes. This emphasis on story, along with both the new multiplayer mode and lengthy main scenario, made Echoes a hit with fans and gaming media outlets, but an increase in difficulty, with Echoes being seen as particularly harsh, was noted all around for this game. Following those two games is 2005's Metroid Prime Pinball for the DS, developed by Fuse Games, which was a company that had worked previously on Super Mario Ball for Nintendo. Using the concept of a pinball table as a base, Metroid Prime Pinball integrates a variety of Metroid design ideas, including usage of weapons and abilities such as the Morph Ball, and enemies that wander around the table. The table takes up both screens of the Nintendo DS, and there are 6 different tables, all inspired by different areas in Metroid Prime. However, Pinball also allows for multiplayer play, for which only one copy of the game is required, allowing up to 8 players per one copy, and with the 7th map selectable as an option. While it's easy to be skeptical of adaptations of franchises to genres outside of what they're most known for, Pinball reviewed quite well and was seen as generally fun. Critics were split on the minigames and whether or not the game offered enough in terms of content, and some even saw the minigames as more interesting than the base pinball game. The following year, 2006, would see the release of Metroid Prime Hunters for Nintendo DS. Hunters takes place between Prime and Echoes and sees Samus traveling to the Alembic cluster, far outside the reach of the Galactic Federation. After receiving a strange telepathic message about acquiring the ultimate power, the Galactic Federation tasks Samus with investigating and properly handling the power once discovered. Other bounty hunters intercept this telepathic message and aim to retrieve the the power for themselves. This game was developed by Nintendo Software Technology instead of Retro Studios, the latter being already busy working on the third Metroid Prime game. As for Nintendo Software Technology, you might know them for their work on the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series. Hunters was a little title meant to emphasize action and multiplayer gameplay, with online multiplayer via Wi-Fi allowing for voice chat, though voice chat only works with friends. From the outset, Hunters was meant to emphasize online multiplayer, and as a complete package, reviewers were largely impressed with Hunters, who saw it as cramming a lot into one game onto hardware that many wouldn't have expected to host an online multiplayer game. Criticisms levied at the game included an awkward control scheme, which incorporated the stylus, and an underwhelming main scenario campaign. In 2007, Metroid Prime fans were treated to the last of the games in the Metroid Prime trilogy, Metroid Prime 3: Corruption. While the first two Prime games released on the GameCube, Corruption released for the Wii. It saw Samus warring with the space pirates, who were using the destructive substance Phazon to war with the Galactic Federation. The space pirates had also been cooperating with Dark Samus, the combined forces of which sought to spread Phazon across the universe. This evil alliance was seeking to take down the Galactic Federation and subjugate the universe by using Leviathan seeds, meteors that contain Phazon, to infect planets. Phazon naturally corrupts Samus, the planets that it makes contact with, and living organisms, including other bounty hunters Samus encounters in the game, and Samus must fight to restore normalcy to the universe, stop the spread of Phazon, and end the plans of Dark Samus with the space pirates. This feeling of epicness was something Retro Studios sought to capture in closing out the Metroid Prime trilogy. Multiplayer, a glaring omission considering Echo's offering of multiplayer and Hunter's online multiplayer on the DS, is not present in this game, as the main scenario was seen to be the main selling point of the Metroid Prime games themselves. The game had to be delayed a year in order to properly transition to and integrate the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, but ultimately it released to great critical acclaim, as did the rest of the Metroid Prime titles. Later in 2009, Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes would release along with Corruption for the Wii as Metroid Prime Trilogy, though Trilogy wouldn't be released in Japan since Prime and Echoes were released separately for the Wii through a port series called New Play Control. As a compilation, Trilogy is a heavy offering of content. Generally well received as a package, critics were divided on the control scheme, having experienced the first two Prime titles with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. The Prime Trilogy complete, the next Metroid game is Metroid Other M for the Wii, releasing in 2010. It's an action game made by both Nintendo and Team Ninja. Other M makes use of only the Nintendo Wii Remote, the controls being simplified to appeal to a broader base of players. While the Metroid franchise was well liked, arguably in the West more so than other regions, it didn't sell as strongly as the other Nintendo properties. In a bid to offer a new type of Metroid experience, much greater emphasis was given to characterization and story than ever before, with the particular vision of that characterization and story often being criticized by fans. It was developed over the course of 3 years with a total staff of 100 people. Gameplay switches between third-person and first-person perspective. New to the franchise are melee attacks and the refilling of health and ammo by using navigation booths or the concentration mechanic, the latter of which requires that you be uninterrupted by enemy attacks. Some power-ups cannot be used until she acquires the authorization for it from her commanding officer, unlike previous games, which emphasize discovery and exploration. While the game on the whole is seen as a fresh experience that does its best to corral a new audience, critics were harsh on the linearity of the game, the way in which power-ups were acquired, and the script and characterization of Samus, the latter two of which have been widely panned. Other M's release was followed by another period of dormancy for the Metroid franchise, and not until the announcement and release of the first-person shooter Metroid Prime Federation Force would fans and the public finally be treated to a new Metroid title. Federation Force doesn't star Samus, but rather Marines from the Galactic Federation Police, who use mechanical suits modeled after Samus's power suit. The game offers single-player and multiplayer play, with the latter being co-op. Federation Force was unveiled at the same E3 2015 that saw the debut of Star Fox Zero, a new title for another long-dormant franchise. Federation Force's reveal, however, was met with a great amount of derision, for little apparent resemblance to other Metroid franchise games, and for Federation Force as a spin-off being the title to hail the franchise's 30th anniversary, among other complaints. It would ultimately neither sell well nor review well. Prior to the game's full unveiling, Nintendo revealed Blast Ball, being described as a training simulation for the Marines, at the 2015 Nintendo World Championships. The game, which features 2 teams of 3 competing against each other to shoot balls into a net, would later be included in retail packages of Federation Force as well as being a free download, with the free download option being taken down at the end of 2016. The next and latest new Metroid game to be released would be 2017's Metroid Samus Returns, developed and released for the Nintendo 3DS. It was worked on by both Nintendo and Mercury Steam. It's a remake of Metroid 2 in the way that it makes it feel significantly different from the original. Gameplay is rendered on the top 3DS screen with the HUD visible on the bottom screen. Melee counters can be performed on enemies by pressing the X button right as an enemy attacks, placing them in stun and allowing you to follow up with another attack or even killing certain enemies. It can be used while Samus is grabbing a ledge, and if properly executed will net Samus a full charge for her charge beam. The newly introduced Scan Pulse ability allows players to search for hidden items or passages, and there's also fast travel being introduced via teleport stations. Abilities introduced after Metroid 2, such as the Grapple Beam, are also seen in this game. While some of the features introduced might perceivably hamper the sense of adventure and exploration that are so foundational to the spirit of Metroid, the game was nevertheless seen as a solid return to form for the franchise and was on the whole well received. And that concludes our video on the Metroid franchise. The world's holding their breath for more updates on Metroid Prime 4, but at least with news of returning developer Retro Studios being in charge, we can rest a little bit easier. So which is your favorite Metroid game? Do you prefer the Prime titles, or do you prefer the more classic Metroid games that begin with the first Metroid title? Do you have a vision for an entirely different type of Metroid game? And would you be happy to see the Metroid franchise move to a different genre in the future? Why is it that the Metroid franchise, one that's very widely revered, doesn't have consistent output compared to something like Kirby? Is it that Nintendo simply chooses to focus on more popular franchises, or is the Metroid franchise frequently the victim of unfortunate circumstances? It's almost like the Star Fox franchise, except that while Star Fox as a franchise is more popular and well known, its library doesn't have the same critical and fan reception on average that the Metroid series does. Do you believe that Metroid Prime 4 will yield a return to health for the Metroid franchise as a whole? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily. Also, don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon, that way you don't miss out on any of our videos.